Hello and welcome. I'm so glad that you're able to join me today, and I appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to learn a little bit more about influenza. My name is Travis Fairbanks, and during this video, I want to touch on some basic aspects of the influenza virus, the importance of the flu vaccine, and some myths that have surrounded the vaccines in general. Influenza, or the flu, has three different types, which I have depicted with these viruses here. A type A, a type B, and a type C. And on their surfaces they have proteins which help the virus enter and exit the host cells. And as you can see here, type A and B contain the H and N protein, and the type C contains the F protein. Now there are many variations of these proteins, so they are further subdivided by a number. You may remember that the H1N1 virus that everyone talked about, all this simply meant was that the virus contains the H protein 1 and the N protein 1, or the H3N2 virus, which has the H protein 3 and the N protein 2. Influenza type A, more specifically the H3N2 virus and the H1N1 virus, are the most common type A viruses in circulation, both of which can infect humans as well as some animals. Influenza type B is less common than type A, and it does not mutate as often, which is good news for our immune system. Influenza type B does contain the H and N proteins, however, there are only a few variations that only have the ability to infect humans. Lastly, we have influenza type C, which is the least common among the influenza viruses and is least likely to mutate. Influenza C has the ability to infect not only humans, which can cause a mild illness in children, but also pigs. Influenza C also contains that F protein on its surface, which differs from the H and N proteins, but it still accomplishes the same task of entering and exiting the host cells. Now, type A causes the most severe form of the flu. During replication, the flu virus can create genetic copies of itself, but it can also create daughter cells whose H or N protein is slightly different from the parent virus. These small changes to the surface proteins of the virus is enough to evade the immunity that our bodies had developed to a previous infection and makes us sick. This process is called genetic drift and is the reason why there is a need for a seasonal influenza vaccine. Another process the flu uses to evade the host immunity is called antigenic shift. Here we have a pig cell, and on one side is a typical pig virus that we will call H2N2, and it mainly infects pig hosts. On the other side we have another influenza virus, let's call H3N4, and this one usually infects human hosts, but as we discussed before, some viruses can infect both human and animal. Now both of these flu viruses are going to inject their RNA into the pig cell. This RNA then meshes together in what's known as reassortment, and it creates an entirely new virus that contains parts from both the pig virus and the human virus. Unlike genetic drift, which only changes the H and N protein slightly, antigenic shift creates an entirely new H or N protein. Antigenic shift is a problem because when the new virus that was created comes into contact with humans, we have little to no protection against this new form. And with little to no protection, we end up getting sick. And depending how easily the disease is transmitted from person to person, it may not take long for an entire community to become ill. Antigenic shift is responsible for the major influenza pandemics in the past. One of the worst pandemics was the Spanish influenza of 1918. This disease, which was the result of an antigenic shift, infected over 500 million people worldwide, and within that year there were 50 million deaths, with many believing that this is a low estimate. Now, influenza can travel a distance of about 6 feet through the air when someone coughs or sneezes. These droplets contain the virus and can land in the eyes, nose, or mouth of another person as well as be inhaled. The particles that don't land on an unlucky victim can still land and survive for some time in the environment, such as on a doorknob, and then be picked up by another person. If that person then touches their eyes or mouth before washing their hands, the virus can get into their system and they get sick. Influenza symptoms typically begin between 1 to 4 days after catching the flu. However, you are contagious to everyone around you 1 day before you show symptoms, as well as 1 to 2 weeks after your symptoms have improved. So even though you feel fine, you can still pass the disease on to anyone around you. Symptoms can range from a headache, runny nose, sore throat, and a cough, to more severe life-threatening complications, which I won't be covering in this presentation. Symptoms will begin to improve after about a week, but a cough can persist for about 2 weeks, and remember that is one of the main mechanisms by which this disease can be spread. Herd immunity is the idea that if enough people in your community are immune to or vaccinated against a disease, it will have nowhere to go. So let's pretend that everyone able to receive the flu vaccine does. This excludes those under 6 months of age, people with life-threatening reactions to the vaccine, and those who are immunocompromised due to a chronic condition. The flu virus will not be able to work its way into this community, and those not vaccinated will benefit from the protection provided by the rest of the community. Now let's pretend that some of the individuals in this community choose not to vaccinate. Here the virus is able to get into the community, but there are still enough people vaccinated that it cannot infect the entire community, and those who can't receive the vaccine are protected, as well as some of the individuals who chose not to get vaccinated. Finally, let's assume that the trend of choosing not to vaccinate continues. Here the virus is able to infect all those who did not receive the vaccine, and those who were at higher risk of influenza complications succumb to the virus and could potentially die. Now we know that the best tools to prevent the influenza virus is through vaccinations. The vaccine comes in a couple different forms. There's a trivalent inactivated influenza vaccine, which is a destroyed or killed virus that is injected into a muscle. The live attenuated influenza vaccine is a weakened virus that's usually sprayed into the nose. And finally, there's a recombinant influenza vaccine, which uses a single gene from the virus to activate our immune system. None of these vaccines have the ability to cause the influenza disease. The trivalent in the first one simply means that there is a combination of 3 potential viruses for the upcoming flu season. Scientists use data from around the world to make a best guess for which 3 viruses will go into the vaccine for that flu season. Alright, vaccination risks. The virus is grown in an egg protein, so those with an allergy to eggs can potentially have a reaction to the vaccine. Side effects to the vaccine are typically very mild, with the biggest complaint being soreness, redness, and pain around the injection site. Other symptoms can include low-grade fever, headache, and muscle aches, which are not a response to the flu virus, but side effects to your immune system doing its job. The nasal spray can also cause a runny nose, wheezing, vomiting, sore throat, and a cough. All of these symptoms are considered less severe than the symptoms you would experience with the flu. Many misconceptions surround the influenza vaccine or vaccines in general. First one being that flu shots don't really work. This is untrue, as they are proven to prevent hospitalizations and severe complications from the flu, as well as preventing death from influenza complications. Next one, healthy people don't need a flu shot. You may not be at a high risk for complications, but you come into contact with people every day who are, possibly a parent, a grandparent, or even a friend. If I get the flu, I can treat it with antibiotics. Antibiotics are good for bacterial infections. The flu is a virus. Vaccinations continue to be the best line of defense against the flu. Finally, vaccines give you autism. Now, I've heard this debate repeatedly, and I'm here to tell you that this is a media-driven myth. The study that was conducted in 1998 looking into this found, and I quote, "We did not prove an association between MMR vaccine and the syndrome described," end quote. However, the media ran this story repeatedly to the point that it became a fact to many people. Multiple repeat studies have been conducted with none showing an association. Just pointing out, speak with your healthcare provider about your health, as they will be a great source of knowledge and resources. Thank you again for your time. I hope you took something positive away from this presentation. Continue to stay safe, stay healthy, and consider vaccinating against the flu, not only to protect your own health, but also to reduce the burden placed on the healthcare industry during the COVID-19 pandemic.